Welcome to this training session with Drink Drug Hub. Drink Drug Hub is the place where you can get all the right information about drink and drugs. It's available at that website there, drinkdrughub.co.uk. It's run by North Yorkshire Horizons and it's the place where you can come to find all the best information about drink and drugs. That includes web pages, guides, tools and resources, as well as live training sessions and recorded sessions like the one you're attending today. Now the session we're doing today is called Getting Drink. It's the first module in our alcohol course, and we're going to look at how we misunderstand alcohol in the UK, why we misunderstand alcohol, the harms of alcohol to everyone who drinks, and some simple solutions to reduce those harms. And we're going to begin here, looking at how many people drink in England. The vast majority of people consume alcohol, 82% of us drink, and worldwide the figure's over 85%. So it stands to reason to think that most of us would have a really profound understanding about alcohol and its harms. But what we'll find out today is most of us can believe alcohol to be much safer than it genuinely is. And just to outline those harms, here's a couple of things to go through to begin with. So alcohol is the leading cause of death for men aged between 16 and 54. It's one of the top 5 causes of illness and disability in almost all EU countries. It's our third biggest killer after obesity and smoking, and it increases the risk of developing somewhere between 100 and 200 different diseases. Professor Nutt says actually over 200 different diseases, and it's harmful even at low doses, which is a key piece of information many of us don't realise. And we mentioned Professor Nutt here, and here he is. We've used a lot of his work in today's session, and the reason we've done that is because he's one of the leading experts around alcohol harms. He actually led the government in terms of drug policy for many years, and he completed a really interesting piece of research during that time. He led a team of 30 drug experts to scientifically analyse the harms of the most common drugs used in the UK, including alcohol. And when they completed this research, they published the data, and it looks like this. Alcohol came out as the most harmful drug consumed within the UK. It was actually more harmful than heroin. There's a couple of caveats to bear in mind here. What he's not saying is that it's as harmful to the individual user, but in terms of society harm, alcohol is the most harmful drug. And this is due to links to violence to others. So you can see on this bar chart here, the red part denotes harm to other people and the blue part denotes harm to the individual user. So alcohol really scored highly on that, but there's a couple of other things to bear in mind as well. So unlike other drugs, alcohol is a drug that once we start consuming it, we generally consume it throughout our lives, whereas with illegal drugs, generally people experiment, use them in their early years, and then gradually stop taking them as they get older. And the other thing is, with illegal drugs, most consumption of those drugs are actually pretty infrequent. And if you want to explore that, come and do the drugs course. So typically people will take illegal drugs less than once a month, unless they develop dependency and addiction issues. Whereas with alcohol, most of us will consume this drug several times a week. So our lifetime consumption of this drug is really high. And that's responsible for a lot of those harms. Now in the live session for this video, we actually watch a clip available on Drink Drug Hub starring Professor Nutt. He appears on a podcast with Ross Kemp and he explains how alcohol works as a drug when you drink it, what happens in your brain, and also some of the harms that come with that. It's well worth taking a look. We can't play it in a recorded version of this training, but you can go and watch it at Drink Drug Hub. It's there online now. In the meantime, we would like to question how many people actually realise the harms of alcohol. We know most people drink, but how many know the harms? Now to demonstrate this, there's a really good programme made by Adrian Childs for Panorama. You can watch it on YouTube. He looks at drink labelling and he looks at awareness of alcohol harms. In the small still that you can see here, this is a part of the programme where he goes into a pub and he delivers a quick pub quiz to the people in there. He asks them how many people in the pub realise the harms of alcohol and realise what the low risk drinking level is in the UK. Now the answer to that question is 14 units. That's about 6 glasses of wine, 6 pints of beer a week. Interestingly, in that pub, only one person got that answer right. So in other words, this pub was filled with people consuming that drug, but most of them didn't know how much or how little they should be consuming. And what we realise is actually public awareness is really poor about alcohol harm. So we've got 4 bits of research on the screen here, looking at the public awareness about how many units are in a bottle of wine, how many units they should be consuming a week for low risk drinking, alcohol's impact on the heart. It is damaging to the heart, and also alcohol's risk of cancer, which we're going to come back to. As you can see here, most people were unaware of these things, despite probably most people consuming that drug. And it's not just the public. You can complete surveys with professionals as well. This is some research completed with trainee doctors in Yorkshire, and it found that actually only a third of them, in fact less than a third of them, could accurately estimate the number of units in a bottle of wine. And that's really concerning, bearing in mind how alcohol is linked to so many different illnesses for which people may present at the GP. Which takes us here in terms of how does this happen? And what I'd like to think about is the first time you tried alcohol and the information you were given at that time and how this came about. And what we know is that for most people, this situation looks a lot like this. They're most likely to have been given alcohol for the first time by their parents within a homely setting. This is likely to have taken place during the ages of 13 and 14. And as I say, the drug's probably been supplied by their parents, which tells them something about its safety and that it's okay to drink in this way. Even so, by the age of 5, most children have probably formed these attitudes already because they've already seen their parents drink and other people in their lives consume alcohol, as well as watching this on television and other media sources. Now, just for the record, the Chief Medical Officer advises that children shouldn't be given alcohol below the age of 15, and after this, only sparingly. And there's good reason for that, because we know that if we delay a child's drinking, we also lower their risk of addiction. So if a child is drunk before the age of 18, and that's drunk rather than just having a drink, their chance of developing addiction is about 1 in 4. However, if this occurs after the age of 21, this risk reduces to 1 in 25, and we've got a resource on Drink Drug Hub all about delaying the drinking of young people. In the meantime, young people are going to grow up, they're going to enter society, and they're going to be exposed to all those media influences about alcohol and all the social norms we developed around that. And this is something we really thought about how do we capture in this training session today in terms of the relationship the UK has with alcohol. And we thought, well, if we think about it as a leisure activity, which is really how drinking should be, we can compare how much we spend on drinking compared to other leisure activities that the UK engages in. So in terms of the cinema, we spend £600 million against cinema. We spend £1.3 billion following football matches, and this is specifically on Premiership games. We spend £2 billion at the gym, and we spend over £27 billion on alcohol. It's really hard to find anything that we spend so much money on as a leisure activity. The best that we could do was find gardening statistics, and this came out at 18.6 billion, so significantly less than we spend on alcohol. And that's really important because it shapes how we think about alcohol. We think about it as being a really ordinary, everyday thing, everyday activity. But it's not just about it being an activity. The reason that we normalise this so much is also about where we purchase alcohol. Again, alcohol is very different to illegal drugs in this way. Illegal drugs, you're going to go over a boundary to actually get them. You're going to enter the illegal market, either online or on a street corner somewhere. However, for this psychoactive drug, alcohol, you can pick it up freely within a supermarket. And what you're looking at here are 3 images from a study completed by Alcohol Change, looking at how supermarkets stock alcohol. And what they found was that in England and Wales, is often stocked within high value parts of the store, so corner aisles, in the entrance area, and also at the exit. So you get lots of prompts to purchase this drug. The other thing that's really important is this. They said if you sell alcohol directly alongside grocery staples like fruits and vegetables, it promotes it as just another ordinary commodity, and we start to think about it in that way. So we don't really realise the risk of it as something that could harm us. And it's not just in the supermarkets, it's also on your television set. So for instance, what you're looking at here is a still from Saturday Kitchen. This is a programme out on the BBC every Saturday morning. They have celebrity guests, they make food together, they try it, and they have a drink expert. In this case, it's the man in the red shirt, that's Ollie Smith, and his job is to pair the food to a drink, and often that drink is alcoholic. They'll talk about its smell, taste. It's often a wine, so they talk about the type of grape and the region it was grown in, its acidity, and then they'll ultimately talk about how it complements the food. What they won't do is mention that this is a psychoactive drug and that it can also cause harms. And it's not just Saturday Kitchen, you can see similar things in Jamie Oliver's shows, Mary Berry, and also the Hairy Bikers, and many other chefs besides. But this tells us something else about alcohol. It tells us something about celebrity endorsement. And that's really critical because it's about who's actually behind alcohol and who's promoting it. So for instance, if you want to look at wine, just as an example, we know Kylie Minogue has a brand of wine. Gary Barlow's endorsed it with Sainsbury's, I think. Keira Knightley owns a vineyard, and surprisingly, Snoop Dogg also has a brand of wine. You can buy this from Tesco's for £12. So even though Snoop Dogg is really a big advocate for cannabis, he probably makes a lot of money out of alcohol. And that's just wine. But you can look at other alcoholic drinks as well, and you'll find David Beckham selling whiskey, Ryan Reynolds selling gin, George Clooney selling tequila, Bruno Mars has a brand of rum. And I should actually say these celebrities co-own these brands. It's not just that they endorse them. Dan Aykroyd sells vodka. Jay-Z has a brand of cognac. He's actually sold that onto a drinks firm now. Now we noticed that these were all male celebrities, and we thought, is it about a male celebrity sort of thing? And we found out no. There's loads of female celebs involved in the alcohol industry as well. Again, promoting this product and endorsing it. So we perceive it as being really an aspirational product to engage with. Now there's another reason why we see it as safe. And that's about how we consume alcohol. Now you can consume drugs many different ways. You can sniff them, snort them, inject them. In this case, we drink it. And that's really important in terms of how we perceive it. So I often say to people that I'm supporting with their alcohol use, well, would you use alcohol in the same way if it came as a pill? Bearing in mind what you're really doing is taking a drug. And they'll often say no. It's actually the drinking that I find pleasurable. It's the very act of drinking that I enjoy. I would enjoy it as a pill. And this is where alcohol is really sneaky, because it hides in your drink. So when you have an alcoholic drink, only a certain proportion of it is alcohol. If you look at a pint of beer, for instance, the vast majority of it is actually water. And this poses an interesting question, which is this: which bit causes the harm? Because the logical thing would be to say it's the alcohol that causes the harm. However, if you just remove the soft components of this drink so that you're just left with alcohol, what you're left with is this. And actually, this isn't really that harmful in some senses, because nobody's ever going to try and drink pure alcohol. If this was the only form of alcohol available, none of us would be consuming it. This is a really, really toxic substance and something we wouldn't want to consume. And we're unlikely to try it, although we did have someone attend our training session once and say, please put a label on this to say, don't try and drink this, because they had attempted to. Pure alcohol is actually an industrial solvent. And if you buy it to use in that way, what you'll find is a health warning on it that looks like this. This is the health warning off that product. It's got many different warnings on there telling you be really careful with this. And I've highlighted 3 of them. The one about causing cancer, damaging unborn children, and causing damage to your central nervous system. And the reason I've highlighted those 3 is because those apply equally to the products that you can buy on supermarket shelves across the UK. However, what you'll find here is those warnings aren't on those labels the vast majority of the time. Now, the Alcohol Health Alliance examined 369 products across the UK. They found that only 3% of them carried a health warning. So that's something about risks to your heart, to your liver, the risk of cancer. Now, the manufacturers don't have to put those on. It's a voluntary arrangement, and most of them choose not to. 65% did carry some guidance from the Chief Medical Officer about how much you can drink. I think by law they do have to put a risk on there in terms of drinking when pregnant. But apart from that, the vast majority of manufacturers neglect to advise consumers about the risks. So it stands to reason that you wouldn't understand those risks necessarily when you're buying the product. Next, and finally, in terms of why we perceive it as safe, we have to think about where we drink alcohol these days. We drink it predominantly at home, and that makes it seem like a really safe everyday activity to engage in. In fact, this drinking has really changed in terms of how we consume alcohol in the UK. It's been changing since 1970, and you can follow the process here from the screen. So in 1970, most drinking in the UK took place in pubs, and actually it was mostly men drinking in working men's clubs and venues like that. Most of the market was actually dominated by beer, and that's because this was predominantly a male activity. Now in the 1980s, supermarkets started selling more alcohol, and mostly they sold wine because their clientele were mostly women. What we found out from this was that women would buy wine in the supermarket and bring it home and start serving it with tea. Now men would actually start to stay at home more often to drink alcohol in this way, and actually men's drinking changed a little bit and started to drink more wine as a result of that. Now, through the 80s and 90s up until the early 2000s, the general shift from drinking in pubs to drinking at home was quite gradual, but it really accelerated after that with the introduction of a smoking ban. And when COVID came and we all had lockdown and people had to stay at home, that really embedded the culture of drinking at home. This really came through with a piece of research, and this is a really interesting piece of research because they went off to find one thing and came back with a different finding entirely. Now, what the researchers were looking at, and this is from 2008, was do people drink differently if they live in the countryside compared to an urban area? So they looked at Stoke-on-Trent and they looked at Eden and Cumbria, and they interviewed 1,000 residents between those two places. What they found was that actually they drink in a very similar way. And the really interesting thing is they were all drinking at home, and that wasn't necessarily what they were expecting to find out, and that's why they called it Sainsbury's is my local, because one of the interviewees said, I don't have a local anymore, my local is the corner shop at Sainsbury's. Now they found some other things out as well. Because people are drinking at home, they were combining it with lots of other activities, whereas you used to go to the pub and drink in the pub and that was the activity you were engaging with. When it's in your house, you're likely to drink while doing other things, so while preparing food or watching television or reading or having a bath. There were even people who bought drink to have in their house who didn't drink because they thought it was being hospitable to other people if they came around and wanted to consume this drug. The other big thing that came out of this research was that there was a really poor appreciation of risk. People thought a glass of wine every night was okay if they had a healthy diet and they exercised. And in some respect, this is helpful. A healthy diet and exercise will be helpful for your overall health and well-being. But certainly in terms of harm to your liver, it won't make a huge difference because your liver still has to metabolize the same amount of alcohol. There was also confusion about binge drinking and drunkenness. Some people, in fact most people, thought binge drinking meant drinking so much that you were legless, and it doesn't. It just means how much alcohol can your liver consume. And we come back to that in session 2 in this course. In the meantime, just to summarise what we've learnt so far, although alcohol is our third biggest killer in the UK, we don't treat it that way. The vast majority of us use this drug, we give it to our children, we spend billions buying it. When we buy it in our groceries, we drink often, we drink at home, and we watch TV celebrities promoting it. And when we think about problematic alcohol use, we think of some different celebrities. So we think of people like George Best and Paul Gascoigne. And this is really important because it starts to make that distinction between us and them, those who drink normally and those who have problems with alcohol use. And we can explore that a little bit now. So what you're looking at now are dependency rates. This is the number of people who become dependent on alcohol from all those who drink. It works out somewhere between 1 to 1.5 and 10 people. And what we start to do is label those people. And we generally have a term like alcoholism, and we call them alcoholics, and we say they're the people who have problems with alcohol. But I want to contrast that number with this statistic here. It's still our third biggest killer after obesity and smoking. So alcohol is harming many more people than those people that we've identified there. And the reality is this, that everyone who drinks carries a risk with alcohol use, no matter how little or how much you're drinking. The thing that changes is the nature of the risk in accordance to how much you drink. So at high doses, we're quite familiar with the story about liver harms. We might be less familiar with the idea of harms to the heart, but we don't know about addiction and mental health. These are the things we think about when we think about alcohol harms. But what we're less familiar with is the harm of cancer at low doses in particular. So this is really important to raise awareness around to understand what we're looking at when we're looking at alcohol harms. Now, in terms of high dose consumption, this is something we're going to cover in module 2 called Getting Drunk. What we'll look at for the remainder of this session is what happens with low dose consumption but over a long period of time, and specifically we're looking at cancer. So it's linked to 7 types of cancer, and this risk actually starts from quite a low level. So it's linked to breast cancer, bowel cancer, and cancers of the mouth, upper throat, liver, voice box, and food pipe. If you'd like to explore this issue a little bit further, there is a resource on Drink Drug Hub that will tell you a little bit more about the link to cancer. In the meantime, we have to think about why do we use alcohol? If at low doses frequently consumed, it does increase the risk of cancer, and at high doses, it's linked to all sorts of other illnesses and issues as well. It's a drug that we would probably best avoid. and yet so many of us use it. And so many of us use it for good reason. It's the perfect drug for so many different situations. On the face of it, it's a little bit strange because it's a drug that we'll use when we're feeling relaxed, but also when we're feeling stressed or even quite chronically depressed. Now, we don't have to use a drug to manage those emotions, but being humans, we seek out quick fixes to issues like this, and drugs are perfect for managing emotional states in that way, at least in the short term, and that's why people do it. Now, we don't have to just use alcohol. There's a whole range of different drugs that we could actually choose to use to manage our emotional state in this way. We've got a couple listed down the bottom. Now, the reason why most of us probably choose alcohol is because it's legal, whereas the others are not, and we don't want to break the law. However, there are other things to think about here in terms of why we use alcohol and why it's a legal drug. And that's probably because it's so versatile and so flexible compared to other substances we might use. So for instance, this actually links back to the video of David Nutt that I mentioned earlier, so it's worth going to watch that on Drink Drug Hub if you're interested in it, but I can run you through it now anyway. So in terms of low doses, alcohol will switch on something called your GABA system, and that means your central nervous system will slow down. You'll feel more relaxed. It's what defines alcohol as a depressant drug. In this respect, it's a little bit like taking diazepam. Now, if you take a little bit more, you start to increase serotonin levels, and that will help you feel more empathetic and friendly. It's a little bit like taking ecstasy when you look at the regions of the brain that are affected in this way. And higher doses still will start to release dopamine. That will mean you start to feel stimulated and euphoric. You'll see this in New Year's Eve pubs when people are all loud and raucous and they've been drinking. In this respect, it's a lot like taking cocaine. And then finally, really high doses, you'll release endorphins. That means you'll feel less pain. And it's a little bit like taking heroin. So alcohol will actually do many different things at different dosages. And what we should point out is that most people drinking most of the time want a low dose effect from their drug that they're taking. They just want to feel a little bit more relaxed. However, sometimes this drug can be really hard to regulate so that you actually don't take too much of it. And in part, that's because of, again, the fact that we drink it rather than consume it as a tablet or a pill. We don't order alcohol in grams, we order it in terms of drinks. And that can be quite hard to keep track of when you're drinking. So that's why we've come up with the concept of units, to make it a bit easier to understand how much you're drinking, particularly over the course of a week. Now, a unit of alcohol is equivalent of 8 grams or 10 mils of pure alcohol. So for instance, in a pint of beer, there's 3 units of alcohol for an average strength pint. That just tells you there's 30 mils of pure alcohol in there. A glass of wine has 2.3 units, and a bottle of wine has 10 units. Again, this depends on the alcohol content within each of these drinks. You can find out most of the time by looking at the label. Not every drink has this on the label. Again, they don't legally have to put it there. It's a voluntary arrangement, but many do. And it will tell you how many units are in the bottle or the drink that you're consuming. And if you keep track of that through the week, if you want to stay within low risk guidance, you need to aim to drink 14 units or less over the week, 3 or 4 days where you don't drink anything at all. This is the same for men and women. It didn't used to be, but it got changed in 2016, so that it is now equal for low risk drinking. And that was predominantly due to the risk of cancer and the growing awareness about the risk that starts there, which is the same for men and women. High risk drinking remains different. So high risk drinking for men starts at 50 units and above, and for women it's 35 units and above. Now, if you consume alcohol at 40 units or less regularly, then your chance of dying from an alcohol-related illness is actually under 1%. So one of the things to stress here is that there is risk present, but it's not a very high risk. It's just something to be mindful of. The really interesting question is what happens as you increase your intake above that level. And we can find that information as well, again, from David Nutt. He's charted this out. So if you're drinking regularly, 14 units a week, and you do this over a lifetime, you will on average lose about 0.4 years of your life expectancy. Now, for many people, they will look at that and decide that actually that's not too bad, and they really enjoy having a drink every now and then, and they'll accept that risk. As you increase it slowly though, you can see the risk goes up. So if you're at 21 units, you can expect to lose on average about 0.8 years of your life, and at 35 units, which is about half a bottle of wine a day, you can expect to lose somewhere around 2 years. Now, after that point, it starts to accelerate very quickly. So the difference between half a bottle of wine and a bottle of wine a day is really quite extreme. So a bottle of wine a day will on average cost you about 7 years of your life. And going above that really increases rapidly further. So at 120 units, you can lose about 21 years of your life on average. Again, this is very much average. People have different susceptibilities to harm, which is something we look at in Module 2. What I want to point out though is that this is a graph, it's a chart, it's a line that gradually increases. It's not all or nothing. It's not a binary judgment, which is different to how we think about problematic alcohol use. The way we think about problematic alcohol use is that we think everyone starts out without any issues around alcohol use, and then some people develop those issues, and then we label them as problem drinkers, and everyone else is a non-problematic drinker. We then commission lots of support for people with issues around alcohol use. You can see a list of the support available there. And we think they should engage with that support, and that support should work very hard to try and help them manage their issues around alcohol use. But we forget about everyone else. Now, as I said, we'll come back to the high risk group in session 2 and also session 3. In the meantime, just for the remainder of this session, we need to look at these other people and say, well, they're still at risk of harm, but they haven't actually lost control of their alcohol use. And the really interesting question to finish with is, how hard is it for those people to change their alcohol use and reduce that harm? And there was an interesting piece of research done around this. It was done within hospital settings where people are attending for a wide variety of issues for help with their physical or mental health. They had 1,000 people take part in this survey, or just under 1,000. And what the researchers did is they took 1,000 people and they completed a screening assessment, and of 1,000 people who came out as being above low risk drinking, so they were in the medium risk factor, some were in the high risk factor. None of them were necessarily addicted to alcohol, they were just drinking a bit more than they should have been. The researchers then split them into 3 groups. The first group just had this screening assessment. The screening assessment was called the audit tool, which we'll look at in session 2. The second group had the screening assessment and a basic information leaflet. This is called a brief intervention. You just give people very basic information, a quick chat with them, usually within 5 minutes, and that's your brief intervention complete. And the third group had counselling support for 6 weeks. What the researchers then did is they left them alone, came back to them 6 months later to check in with them and see how their alcohol use had changed. What they found was that all 3 groups had improved their alcohol use by similar levels. Now, the basic information or brief intervention did help, so that was a beneficial intervention to complete, but what they found is the counselling didn't do anything on top of that. That's because these people weren't self-medicating for a mental health issue or any other issues that they had. They already had control. What they lacked was the information about harms of alcohol. And unsurprisingly, most people don't want to be harmed in this way, so they will change their use when they have that information. It's given to them in a positive exchange. The other thing that they can do is actually track their drinking. There's lots of apps that will do this, and we know that this can be also really useful for people to regulate their use. So once they realise some harms around alcohol use, you can give them a tool to help them manage it. So the one that we've recommended is the Drinkware app, but there's other apps available as well. And it's really easy. You download it, and there's a little purple button at the bottom there on the screen, and you tap that to add up your drinks. And the app will chart it for you through the week, and it'll tell you how much you're drinking. So that's a really easy tool to have a look at to regulate your alcohol use. So these are the 3 takeaways from this session. The first thing is that alcohol is a drug, and it should be taken with the same care as you would any other drug. The second is that it's harmful at any dose. That harm will greatly increase at higher doses, but it's still present at lower doses. And finally, most people who drink can manage their intake better with better information, and that's really all they require. And sometimes a tool to record that use can be useful as well. But we've left behind these people. These are our dependent drinkers. We haven't talked about how to help them or how they've ended up in this position where they're drinking so much more than maybe they should really for their general health and well-being. Well, we explore that in session 2. It's called Getting Drunk. There'll be a recording available shortly, and I'd welcome you to go and attend that, or to attend a live session with us at Drink Drug Hub, where you'll also find lots of resources, web pages, guides and tools about drink and drugs to inform you and others about the harms of drink and drugs. Thank you for attending.